Hello and welcome to Ditching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. Today I am joined by guest Zach Stevens. Zach, welcome to the show.
Jonathan, super stoked to be here. Thank you for having me.
We are going to talk about product marketing as a subscription service today. I know everyone's going to be very interested about that. But first, can you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Zach. I am a designer of 9 years. And earlier this year, I've been toying with the idea of potentially doing a subscription model for my own services for brand identity design, web design, and my now co-founder, who is a very skilled and gifted marketer, copywriter, came to me with the idea of doing product marketing as a service. So ended up joining forces with him, and now we help SaaS founders turn traffic into revenue.
Love it. And I love the name
Yeah.
Version Factory.
Well, Corey is a very gifted copywriter, so naturally he's able to come up with these good monikers for services, offerings, and brands. And I love it because you're able to do so much more with a well-crafted name and good story design-wise. So props to him for coming up with a good name.
Killer. Love it. Okay, cool. So this conversation originated from an email you sent. It was almost 2 months ago, I think, correctly. And you said that at the time you had just launched, and then soon after that you were almost completely sold out or booked up. And we decided that we should wait a little bit to see, how you liked it, how it went, a couple of months. So what can you tell us about, I guess, I'm super curious about the initial launch and how you got the word out and who were your first clients, that kind of thing. So because the idea is to paint the picture for someone who might be kind of renting themselves out by the hour to do a particular thing. And don't love the idea of doing sales. They don't love the idea of the why conversation and trying to get good at sales interviews and writing proposals. And they'd like something perhaps not as high margin, but they'd be willing to trade that kind of high margin, high stakes custom project proposals life for a more predictable income on a subscription basis. And I might be assuming the subscription piece, but let's talk about that. But a more predictable income, a more productized service, and probably, I'm guessing, a more focused kind of work. But I'm kind of making a lot of assumptions here. So what was the initial experience like switching from not subscription for whatever to subscription for a particular thing?
At the time, I had done subscription, like, in air quotes, for specific clients that I really liked or that I had a good relationship with. Also, one that I did not have a good working relationship with, but we can dive into that story as well, because there's a lesson to be learned about how you go about running something like this.
Mm.
So I had done it before and I knew that it was predictable. I liked the idea of not having to go about doing things like a scope analysis or producing any kind of proposal, and just you get one thing at a time and you can give it to me. As long as it's within my wheelhouse and my competencies, then I will get it back to you. The catch is that I don't have to track hours. We don't have to look at a defined scope. As long as I can do it, I will do it for you. Catch is you just get one thing at a time. So I was familiar with it already, and there were some hesitations that I had about jumping into it and going the full-fledged subscription model of like not being able to funnel everybody through a interview with me to do like a initial sales call. But then I'd seen so many other people have success with it, and Brett from Design Joy is kind of the bastion of
Right.
this model. One person earning $1.2 million a year, and then I heard you speak with Ron Baker about the subscription model as well. And he and you and my co-founder Corey echoed something that came up 3 times, and it took that third time for me to finally get it and for it to register, which was they're not paying for your services, they're paying for access to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was probably the first leap that took me to be on board with it, as opposed to something like value-based pricing or productized services with a more defined scope. And as far as the initial launch goes, I was very fortunate because Corey, my co-founder, had done such a diligent job over the years building up a huge email list for people who are either marketers or have a marketing position at a company. So he's got 20,000 people following him on Twitter, 20,000 people on his email list. And so when we sent this out and launched it, our conversion rate had to be in like the thousandths of percentage points to make us at full capacity.
Right.
Uh, so we had a lot of things going in our favor. And I mean, I don't want to discount myself too much because I did a good job of making us look legit and like we were worth people's money based on the branding and stuff that I did. But we had a lot of people that we were able to get right in front of.
Nice. That's fabulous. Okay. So what, you said a thousandth of a percent of 20,000 people or 40,000 people if you count social also.
Mhm.
What were your thoughts around capacity at the time? Like, what did you think was the maximum number of clients you could handle, just as a guess?
Well, we set the bar very low. We said we only want to take on 5 at one time to see how well we manage these people. And when you're charging $6,000 per person as your minimum price, that's $30,000 per month, uh, which is nothing to snuff at. That's a sizable income for essentially two to three people running the show, just to see if we could manage the workload. So we knew that we were going to cap it at 5. We ended up having 2 people sign up at like the exact same time. So we ended up going 1 over. And we're like, okay, we'll be all right.
Nice problem to have.
Nice problem to have. But now we're opening it up again. The whole point was to just make sure that we could manage the workload and also to promote some kind of scarcity with the kind of people that we were working with and to show that we're not here to service 100 different people poorly. We're here to service 10 to 12 at max very efficiently.
And what are those? So I'm imagining you have a very specific, even more specific than you already listed out. So like, who's your ideal client based on what you know now?
We like to work with SaaS teams of less than 10 people, ideally, that have got some runway. Like they've established the fact that they have a good product. They probably, I think the most common thing that we have is around the problem of a leaky bucket, where they're getting a bunch of traffic. They have a lot of people that are coming to their site, but there's so many parts where they fall out, either through poor messaging on the website, not being able to convey, look legit, like they look scammy, or they look like a bootstrapper created it, and so it's not like worth the price tag. Email sequencing, all the things that are around product marketing, and after somebody hits the website is where we come in and do the most damage and make it like turning products into something like a nice to have to something that people must have right now.
Great. Okay. And so that's, you said, I think at the beginning, you used the word conversion, like turning your traffic into customers or something like that.
Traffic into revenue.
Traffic into revenue. Thank you. Okay, great. Cool. Well, that's got to be very attractive to that market, right? So that they know they've got this sort of leaky funnel or leaky bucket. They're getting traffic to the site. They know once they activate clients that they stay around. That you're not solving a churn problem, right? So it's a very, very specific problem that you're solving. Or tell me if you are. Correct me.
Sometimes it is. It's because oftentimes churn is a result of bad expectations.
Okay.
And we try and help set the expectations of this is exactly what you're getting. And it's hard for people to talk about themselves just in general from a company standpoint, but then also to say it in a way that's very clear and concise, and avoiding being cute and more trying to answer questions with clarity and setting them up so they know what they're getting into. And this is what I will receive from this product. And that helps mitigate against the churn that is prevalent in a lot of SaaS companies.
Yep. Okay. So is there any pattern, the types of SaaS, like are they typically more B2C or B2B or enterprise or tiered, or, is there, just curious if those things are, if you see any patterns there, or if it's really just more about the team size and the fact you got this kind of proven product, but a leaky bucket.
Well, 90% of SaaS is B2B initially. So that sets us up to have more of a pool of people that are in the B2B space. We could operate for someone that's in a B2C arena, but just given the nature of how many SaaS companies there are and the likelihood that they will be a B2B company, all of ours are B2B. So it's around things like people who are offering a SMS marketing platform for creators, or a AI site monitor and heat mapping tool. So a lot of it's around business to business problems. And as far as enterprise versus non-enterprise, I feel like now every SaaS company has an enterprise platform, whether they use it or not. is a different story. It's usually just there's like a pricing anchor. Uh, but I would say that I would characterize 1 to 2 of our clients as an enterprise tool, and then the remaining 5, I would say, are I wouldn't call them. It's not they couldn't be enterprise, but they more operate for other small to medium sized businesses as well.
Okay. And how different are their relative price ranges? Like, are they all kind of have a starting offer? I'm going to guess it's a lot of bronze, silver, gold, and price tiers. They're starting in the $49 range and they go up to maybe the $495 range. But is that totally off base, or is that kind of what you're looking?
Some go a little bit higher. Like we just got off the phone with somebody who their highest tier is $999, like $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
That's their ultra enterprise solution. But that sounds about right. I think that there might be a couple as well that are that have it's like a $20 tier.
Yep.
At least if they have an offering for somebody who's like a boutique or a solopreneur business, but that's specifically within their marketing. Like they have that offer because they're working with soloists, and having that $20 tier for a single person operation is a lot more feasible than $49,
Right.
which would be more than double the cost.
Right. Okay. So that paints a really clear picture of how specific at least whether or not, how much this was conscious and how much of it was just like a result of coming from Corey's list and who was on there. It's very specific. It's extremely specific. So
Yes.
I think that would end up being quite important in terms of capacity planning and what you would expect the workload to be. So if you had somebody, for example, if HubSpot hired you or some Salesforce, like someone huge, right? I would imagine you would be likely to get overwhelmed with requests because they've got so many irons in the fire. They got so many employees, like let's pivot into capacity a little bit and talk about your process for not getting overwhelmed by, I think you said 7 clients now. How many do you have now?
Yeah, currently we have 7.
Okay.
And we'll be hopefully at 9 by the end of the week if things go well.
Cool. That's awesome. So what is the capacity? What was the fear? And then what was the reality months later?
The fear was that we were going to not be able to fulfill and do a job to our standards, that we couldn't put out work that we felt really proud of and that clients would be really happy with. And also starting small, because both Corey and I, there's no reason, we both thought that this is a hypothesis and we're going to test it out, see if we like this, if the workload is good, and if we feel that we can do this and do it in a way that makes us both feel good for what we're putting out there and that provides value to clients. And then just seeing how often we can do that. It was really just to help us dip our toe in instead of having to jump headfirst, because both of us have other businesses as well that I'm technically still running Zach Stevens Design Company, even though all my time is going to Conversion Factory. But the point was for us to test this out and see how effectively we could do it, and making sure that we had a number that we knew we could handle so that we didn't get overwhelmed with 20 people signing up. And all of a sudden we have this huge backlog of stuff that we need to do. And our initial launch blows up like before it even leaves the atmosphere.
Right. Okay. So what was the experience? So you got these 6 people that probably all onboarding right around the same time, which is probably wouldn't be normal, once things are a going concern, and you probably, of course, like everyone, you're going to have some churn as well. And in theory, you'd have a little bit more control over when new clients were onboarded and so forth. And there's a lot of controls you could have then, but so launch is a special situation. You're like, okay, cap it at 5, 1 extra snuck in. And maybe not at first, I guess I'm curious about, what do you do now? What have you changed about your initial onboarding? What did you learn from your initial approach to onboarding that has been changed, if anything?
I think the biggest takeaway from us was, particularly for the people that are coming to see us, there's a lot of strategic implementation that they want first, which we hadn't thought they would want, because we thought that with the subscription model that they would be more looking at to us is
Yeah.
like, hey, create this landing page, create this logo, do some copy for this, make an email sequence for us for our onboarding.
Mm-hmm.
But in actuality, we got more people on a higher tier. And I think that we're going to start pushing people to say, hey, it works really well depending on their circumstance. Like you mentioned HubSpot. HubSpot doesn't need a lot of strategic advice from us. At least I don't think so. But to push people and say, it works really well if we're able to jump in and do some of the premium tier services that we offer, like customer research, positioning, pricing strategy, brand strategy, so that we can lay a more solid foundation before we start doing all these other things. If we build you a bunch of landing pages and we know that you're going to want to update your branding and your messaging, then we're going to have a lot of dirty dishes that we have to clean up and then get out of the sink. So let's just clean the dirty dishes that you have right now before we start making new ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great analogy. So visual. And I think you said you were surprised by how many people did kind of want that a higher level positioning, branding, and so forth.
Yeah, we actually have, it's about half now. So it's more than half. So more than half of our clients right now are on a higher strategy based tier with our premium sync tier, where they get FaceTime with us on a biweekly basis. And there's some premium services in there as well that aren't available on the lower tier. And it's more than half. More than half are on that premium tier.
And how much is that?
9. So async plan is $6,000 a month, and then the premium tier is 9.
Killer. Okay, and what about the what does it feel like capacity wise? So like how close to the edge does it feel? Do you know what I mean? What am I trying to ask here? It's kind of like, how precarious does it seem? I'm assuming you're going to say not very, but I'm curious because I can imagine people thinking like, oh, I mean, you onboarded 7 clients in 2 months, 6 weeks. Like most people, that's 2 years of deals, so
Yeah.
like, yikes, that in theory, and if they're used to clients really burying them with work or lots of change requests or unexpected scope creep or any of those things, like having 7 clients from a standing start, going from 0 to, close to around 50 grand a month, boom, in 1 or 2 months with 2 or 3 people, it's like, it seems impossible. So what's the thing that we don't see from the outside that makes it not impossible?
I think there's a couple things that contribute to it. I will say at initial onset, it did feel like there was a lot going on because we were doing not only fulfillment, but also sales calls of new prospective clients. That was probably like the first month was me and Corey jumping into a call and then both of us going away for 2 hours to work on stuff for clients that had signed up without having to call us and then jumping into another call. Like I remember there was a week where we had like 8 calls lined up in addition to doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
So having to onboard 5 at one time and learn everything about those brands and those clients, and then do work for them as well. Those initial 4 weeks were pretty hectic because we were doing so much, but then it kind of fizzled out. And as soon as we familiarize ourselves with, speaking from my deliverables, like all the design stuff, I got to know all their colors, got to know their typefaces, got to know what their chief marketing officers like and don't like, and how I can be of better service to them. Things got a lot smoother. So I think that if we could have trailed out the onboarding parts, I think that would have made things go a lot smoother.
Right.
Also worth keeping in mind that anytime Corey is working on something, like a copywriting request or email sequencing, or if he's doing customer research, they're not working with me. So it's split that way too. Because since we have multiple people working on stuff, not everything requires both of our attention. So that's been helpful as well.
Right. Got it. Share the duties, share the responsibilities. Okay. So I'm curious, how elaborate, it's been not that long, but how elaborate is your process for getting answers to all those questions? Like you just listed, like finding out what the CMO likes, colors, all this, getting to know them piece. Brett at Design Joy, I think famously, there's no phone calls, no meetings, no nothing, take it or leave it. So how do you communicate? How does the client communicate that stuff to you in a way that allows you to produce satisfactory work as quickly as possible? Is it just a phone call and like they give you access to a Dropbox, or do you have like some kind of software or something that like an ingestion system?
I mean, using the term loosely, ingestion system. In our Notion doc where we have like all of our we run our client operations. We have a template that we use whenever a new client shows up, and we have in there a space for them to put their logo files, any kind of brand guides or positioning work that they've done. We can also take a look at their website as well and just see like, okay, what's the kind of language they use? Do they have any kind of formatting or stuff that we can use that's ready-made, kind of like a boiler, so that we can then work a little bit faster. And as far as understanding what they like, that it's highly nuanced stuff. Things like, oh, I think I would like the letter spacing on this header to be 4 pixels instead of 2. That's more of the stuff that I was understanding and learning, and that they would call me on. But that's okay, because we still, at the end of the day, we're still able to take them to the 96, 97% finished. And then if they have feedback that is something along those lines of, I would like this to be tweaked just a little bit, or can you make that blue a little bit more bluer? Then those are things that I'm not going to know, nor am I going to be able to find out from any kind of material that they give us.
Right.
But that comes with the relationship and the rapport. It never hurts to send smiley faces over, like, as an emoji when you're saying, oh, hey, I'll get right on that, Fred. Thanks a bunch for all your feedback. I appreciate it.
Right. So to summarize that, it's kind of like, minimum viable client communication at the beginning, and then you get to know them through their revision requests. Cool.
Yeah. And we're super, we love using tools like Loom, anything that we can do to make it feel like we are in the room with them. And I will walk through every single deliverable that I send a client, so they can hear the thinking, they can hear the decision-making process that went into it. So there's a lot of communication that's done that might not be face-to-face, but it's really, really good, and it helps get the point across.
So when you say not face-to-face, you mean not synchronous, right? Like, surely you don't do anything in person.
Well, either via Zoom or in person. Because we haven't had anybody, both Corey and I are in San Diego, and we haven't had anybody from our hometown that's wanted to meet up with us until last week, where somebody asked us the question, would you be okay meeting us in person for the first sync up meeting? Which we said, you know what? I mean, if you're in San Diego, we're not going to say no. Just know that this is a very special case, because you are here, and we're not going to do this for everybody.
Yeah.
But when I say communicate, it's just not where we're together, like where they can hear us say something and then respond at the exact same time. It's all done asynchronous communication.
Perfect. That's great. Yeah, that gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of spreading out the workload. So what are the other communication channels? I'd be very curious to know. I'm sure people would be very curious to know, like, what are the channels that you support? It might say this on your website, but is it, for example, do you kind of insist that any new clients go through like your Slack or your Notion or whatever? Or do you say like, oh, we'll join your Slack, or we'll join your Teams instance, or however you say that? And like, how similar in terms of communication, the back and forth communication, how similar are all of your clients? Is it kind of custom for all the different ones? They have different things, or is it all the same and kind of standardized?
This is a really good point, because I don't know if you have this issue, but I know me, if I have things like, if I have to respond to some clients in Gmail, if I have to respond to some clients in Slack, some clients directly in Figma, it just
nightmare.
Hurts your mind.
Nightmare.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's exactly the thing you don't want to do. So centralizing your communication efforts as much as you can. And I stress that because there are some ancillary methods by which I will get feedback. It's like if I send somebody a Loom video, they can comment on the Loom video, and I might get notified there. But that's not as bad as being able to, or having to go through Gmail, go through their Slack, make sure that we're in all the appropriate Slack channels, getting invited to like the ones that they create that we don't want to be a part of. So all our communication is mostly in Notion, and that's where we'll drop things. Yeah, where we'll drop things like comments, because I mean it's such a powerful wiki that you can add pretty much whatever you need to in there. Like I will drop Figma files, Corey can drop, or Corey will most likely just write the copy in Notion itself because he can do that. So most of it's done through there, and the other ancillary methods might be like if the client has a Google Doc that they've written a bunch of web copy on, they might go back and forth within that, or they might comment directly on a Figma file that I've created, which isn't that bad because I have to go look at it anyway. And then I can see more precisely what they're commenting on. So stuff that
Yep.
I don't mind really, but
Yep.
making sure that we weren't subject to joining their Slack channels, any communication methods that they prefer, that was a big no-no for us.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. And over the years, the different things I've done that involved client communications, it's instant disaster if I just can't work with, I learned early on, I could not work with someone who insisted that I use their platform. It just doesn't work. So that is something to keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen. If you have, especially, the thing is, if you follow this model and it works, you're going to have way more clients at the same time, more concurrently than you're used to. Because most people are used to having like one or two. I shouldn't say most people. Most people I work with, they're used to having like one or two clients. Maybe they have a whale client and then maybe two other ones that are old legacy clients that have little things to do, but they don't have, it doesn't get to the level of like, oh, we have 15 active clients. No, it's like a pipe dream, right? So the idea of being concerned about this sort of a thing and how important it is I'm glad we're talking about it because it's pretty important. The other thing that you mentioned around, Figma or maybe Google Docs or whatever, that is something I have never found to be a problem. I'm not sure why, but I think it's like you said, you have to go there anyway. So it's like in your face, and it's a more appropriate place to put it because it's right where you need it. So there's something about that seems like a loophole, but in reality is pretty useful. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's not them having a pattern interrupt, right? It's part of my day to day. Like I'm gonna go in there anyway, and
Mhm.
if it's gonna help expedite the process, then I'm all for it.
Right. Or do you have to there's this thing called Figma and that's where we do it. And you like kind of onboard them into the product.
Figma, given the people that we work with, Figma is a really common design tool, especially for people who are in the software industry. So that one we haven't had a lot of issue with at all. Notion has had some people like we had a client say, I just don't like moving the cards back and forth. But that would have been any of those Kanban
Yeah,
board systems,
Trello.
right?
Yeah.
Like whether it's Trello or Asana, whatever. Uh, so all we do is we send a quick little video when they come on board that is, here's how to use this Notion doc. And if you want to make a request, here's how you do it. The thing is to try and limit the stuff that they have to do.
Yeah.
Because for us, we're just like, no, you just move the card and then write stuff. Like that's it. You don't have to, because you can do a bunch of stuff in Notion, but they don't have to do that. That's just for us
Right.
to know.
Right. Okay. Cool. So it hasn't been too much of a problem, but it has cropped up a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Cool. What would you say are the boilerplate or the templates or any systemization that you've done or plan to do very soon? What are the real low-hanging fruit kinds of things that you think would probably be common for someone who might be making a shift like this, from just doing custom stuff to having a subscription as a service? And because you mentioned that you had like a questionnaire, you mentioned the onboarding video for like how to use Notion. Like what are some other things that you maybe did manually a few times and you're like, this should be a video, and then you made the video and like, wow, I don't have to do that anymore. So I'm looking for early optimizations on probably the communication process or the file transfer or whatever.
Yeah, I think that so getting that initial video of this is how Notion works, here's how you use it, that goes out when the client signs up was really helpful because it just got them in. Notion does have a drawback in that you're not able to get the same kind of automation that you are with Trello. It's like we actually do have to create the board when someone signs up and then invite them to it, which was something that we think we might want to change later this year. Like we might be switching platforms as far as what we manage all our stuff in. simply for that purpose. But because we took on so few clients, we're like, it doesn't really matter. Like we can create a template for them and then duplicate it, invite them to it. So that wasn't that huge of an issue. But that would be one thing. If I could go back, I would try and do something that was very automated, like no delays in the process of someone signs up, then they can immediately create the task that's on their mind that's making them want to sign up in the first
Right.
place.
The whole reason. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't that big of a deal for us because, again, we were taking on so few and we were awake and we got notified as soon as people signed up. So it felt instantaneous, even though it really wasn't.
Yeah.
The second thing I would say is that because the stuff that we're doing has so many compounding tasks on it, we've created what are called blueprints. And these are like predetermined sets of tasks that walk people step by step. Like if you want a web page, here's step 1 to do that. Here's step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then they can move those cards over and they already have somewhat of a roadmap of all the things that need to get done.
Whoa,
And
wait. So that's very interesting, but I'm not sure I'm understanding. So
Sure.
let's go back to, it's a web page and they want, just like re-say that a little slower because that sounds very interesting.
So, I mean, Conversion Factory being Conversion Factory, we have blueprints that are inside of our Notion boards.
Like best practices kind of things?
No, they're
Like,
actually,
what do
it's
you
like
mean,
a blueprint.
blueprint?
Like it's a blueprint. Like here's step 1 to do this thing that you want. So, because we know what most of the tasks people come to us for.
Mhm.
It's web pages, websites, email onboarding, brand identity design. And like, I would say those are probably the biggest ones.
Okay.
Or like a miscellaneous marketing collateral. So having done all this stuff before, we know what the steps are in the frameworks. So we can have a card in there that has subsidiary cards inside of it. It's like when someone moves a web page blueprint over, we can take the small subtasks out of that, and then they all get populated in the backlog.
Okay.
And we'll move the first step over. Does
So
that make sense?
it's getting closer. So as the customer experience, so I'm your client and you're explaining this to me. So and you say something like, okay, like just break it down into like the like I'm 6 years old. Like Zach says to Jonathan, I'm your new client. If you want a web page, do this.
Yes. So I'd say, Jonathan, if you want a web page,
Yeah.
you can take our web page blueprint and then you can take all of the subtasks that are a part of that and use those as a starting point so that you know exactly what tasks have to go into this. And that way you're not having to think from scratch, like what is the first subtask that needs to come into this larger project that I want to achieve and accomplish.
And I'm in Notion and I'm grabbing this
You are.
mini project, subtasks anyway. And what am I moving over? Like one, because you're only allowed to make one request at a time. So if I move the whole thing over, then I'm kind of giving you like 12 requests, and you're going to work through them one at a time, or am I moving just the first one over?
So there's an analog step in there where they'll move the project task over the blueprint card.
Mm-hmm.
And then inside that blueprint card, there are the subtasks. And so what we will do is we'll go in and we'll move this out because it's like a more nuanced movement and gesture in Webflow, or not Webflow, Notion to do that. So the client will move the web page blueprint over, and then we will say, okay, cool. Like here are the other tasks for that. Let's get started with step 1. So that way we're actually cranking stuff out and sending deliverables over, and doing so with the frameworks that we know need to be done to complete this task as a whole.
Okay. So they move the whole chunk over, so they don't have to think about that. And then you get to work on the first thing.
That's right.
Right. Okay. So then I know this is super tactical, but it's really useful. I know it's useful for people listening. So then in Notion, and I've never seen this in Notion, so I'm just picturing Trello, but in the Kanban thing, then what would you do? You would move that first task into some kind of active column, like this is the thing, in progress, or this is the thing we're working on. And it's like, what's that first one for a web page? Is it like they send over some headline, or like what is it for? Like, how do you know what it's even for?
Yeah. So they'll still have a description point where they can say, what is the goal of this deliverable? What are you expecting? All the general stuff that you would get from a task. And the granularity of it is that they only have to move over the bit, like the web page blueprint, and
Yep.
then we come in, we'll make a duplicate of that so that we have the template still intact. And then we'll take all the subtasks, move those into the backlog, and then get started on step one of all those like 8 subtasks. And
Okay.
the first step in that would, if you're asking specifically, would be something more along the lines of a wireframe where
Mhm.
they let me know exactly what it is. They might have attached a rough outline in like a Google Doc or something like that. And that way we can get to work on a higher level deliverable, like or of like the architecting of that project, and get alignment on that. Cool. Move that over to the done column. Step 2 comes in. Great. Step 2 is finished. Then step 3, 4, 5, 6.
Mm.
And you can actually do this in Trello a lot more effectively, because it's something that after we had come up with this idea for blueprints, I wanted to explore. But Trello actually has a mechanism where you can create these, I forget exactly what they were called, but it's buttons where if I click this, then it will do something with the cards. Like it will auto-populate a series of cards
Mm.
that you teed up. And it was pretty cool. It's something that's probably one of the reasons why we might switch over at some point, because they can do something that's a lot more simple. Like I click this one, it will auto-populate with all these tasks, and it will move task number 1 into the in progress column.
Right. Moves
So
things.
just trying to simplify that idea of one task at a time, because a client's not going to necessarily know where to start
Right.
with like a brand identity process. It's like, I know I'd want this thing, but I have no idea how to get there. So can you help me see what steps need to be taken? Because I might have steps 1 through 4 completed on my end. And then because I know exactly where we're at in the process, I can just know that I know from as a client that we can skip to step 5, and that makes it a lot easier.
Mm. Wild. That's so I've talked to a few people who are doing some kind of implementation execution as a service. And this is unique, and I see tons of benefits to it. It reminds me a little bit of when I interviewed James Turner from Snap Copy, where they've got these different,
But
they sell credits, and then they've got
I
all
was going to
these.
say, yeah, I
Yeah.
remember this podcast. I might just full disclosure, I am a fan of Jonathan's. And I do listen to his podcast. I remember hearing these guys. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like the credit mechanism where you can pay to play
Yeah.
and jump in. I'm sorry, I
But
interrupted you. Continue.
yeah, but the thing about it is the reason that works is because they've got all of these. Because then the problem that they have is like, oh, I bought all these credits because I wanted to do this one particular thing, and I had to buy $3,000 worth of credits, but I only needed to use 500. So like, and for them, they want people to keep using them. They don't want people to, spend $3,000 to get $500 worth of stuff done and then just like let it expire. That's not good for business long term. So they went through the exercise, or I think whoever, earlier might have been Leanna or I who did it, Joanne maybe, but they pre-scoped a whole bunch of common things. And I want to say there were like 20 of them. There were quite a few things. And like this kind of a thing is 1 credit. These are all the things that are 2 credits. These are all the things that are 3 credits. And when you were talking about the blueprints, it reminded me a little bit of that, but instead of this sort of abstraction between the dollars and the credits and the tasks, it's more like, look, we know what needs to happen when, from experience, we know what the patterns are when someone needs a new web page, for example, that is going to turn their traffic into revenue, because the ultimate goal is always the same. The ultimate goal of everything you do is always the same, or at least it's projected that way. It's like turn the traffic into revenue. So, okay, given that base assumption, here's the process for common activities, and we'll just plow through them in a sort of, well, this is a good next question. In what way do you plow through them? So let's say you've got all these people, and they're moving these blueprints over, and then you take the first task out, and this moves into in progress. What does your day look like? So both you and Corey, and like, how does the interplay work? So is like when the thing gets moved to in progress, is it automatically predefined as a copywriting thing for Corey, or as a Figma thing for you, or like what's going on there? And then like you get to your desk, you open up and then what do you do? How do you remember to touch every client in a reasonable amount of time? Like, is it some round robin kind of process? Do you have a list? Like, what was the last thing I did? How do you maintain that?
I'm just very hawkish with everything. So even if I know Corey is working on something that I'm not directly a part of, I still want to know what's going on. In case I do need to jump in, I want to have context for what's done in the past, where they at now, just
Hmm.
gaining all that contextual information so that I can do my job to the best of my ability.
Smart. Okay.
Uh, I mean, my day, I try and plan like just on every Sunday, I try and write down what's going on with each client, like just the last task that's on their Notion board.
Hmm.
So I know exactly what my starting point is going to be on Monday. And I will first, if I can, I will start working on something that I know I have to work on before I check Notion to see if they had moved anything over, if they'd commented, because I want to get the thing done that I know I have to get done. It's like that big rock project on my
Yeah.
plate. Like if I need to develop a web page, or if I need to do logo concepts, or if I need to do something that requires like the best of my brain's abilities, I will work on that first. And then and I generally start work between 8 and 9.
Hmm.
And so I'll go for like however long it takes. If it takes the 3 hour work period that I like to have in the morning to get that done, then that's great, because it was a really big, deep project that required a lot of brain power for me, and I was happy to give it in the morning. And then I'll check
You're probably going into Figma. So like 8:30 in the morning, you like know that client B needs X, and you avoid Notion. You go into Figma or whatever app you need to do that work. Is that right?
That's right.
Great,
Yep.
killer.
Or I'll
Okay.
check. Well, and Corey, Nick, and myself, Nick is our other co-founder. We all have each other's numbers. So if there is and I don't ever expect there to be this because of the industry that we work in, if there was something that really needed my attention, then they would either call me or text me
Mhm.
and say, "Hey, dude, 911, you need to get on this now," and or talk with us about it. But like I said, the likelihood of that is very low considering the things that we work on.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah. So
So how many client to use? I keep using the word touch, and I know that's the word. It just feels weird, but like, how many clients do you touch in a given day? Like, what's the goal? Do you try and touch every client project, move every client project or task forward a little bit every day, or is it like throughout the course of the week you're going to touch everybody at least once? How do you like, what do you think is the, I don't want to say bare minimum, but that's kind of what I mean. Like, what do you think is the bare minimum in terms of client communication for them to feel like you're still in their corner, you haven't forgotten about things are moving forward, and they're happy to let their, I don't know, I guess credit card run again at the end of the month, or when they see it run, they're like, yeah, that was worth it.
I think if you can get to them within every 48 hours, then you're doing solid, because a lot of times they'll move a project over and it will have a set duration, like a typical duration on there of 1 to 3 days.
Oh,
Like
really?
that's our lowest one. Yeah.
Hmm.
So like if we're doing something that requires a really big, heavy lift, like if Corey's doing customer research, I mean, that could take weeks. It's where he's actually going on calls with their customers and getting information and listening to them. So uh, I feel like as long as they can see things being worked on within every 48 hours, and even if it's just a progress update, like, hey,
Hmm.
this is where I'm at so far. If you need to do a technical gut check on something, go ahead. Uh, that's it. And most of the clients, because some of them do get to see us, have sync calls with us every other week.
Right.
Those
More than
ones
half.
we can, yeah, we can wait until like we see them again to like, because they probably want to talk through some of the nuance of the project anyway,
Mhm.
and then we can do that. But I try and do every 48 hours, depending on the task. Like if I had a bunch of stuff that I could do while I was watching TV that
Mhm.
wasn't a big deal, then I'm just gonna bust through those as quick as I can and get them all off my plate, so that way everyone's happy. It really depends on what each client is looking for. Um, what I would aim to do is just do what has to get done. So if it's a really big task, then I'm going to allocate a specific amount of time to that so that I know I'm going to give this my best efforts and things that need to do what needs to get done for it.
Yeah.
But
What's
if
an
it's a
example of a,
small,
oh, sorry. Before
well, I
you
was
move
just going to
on,
say if
like,
it's
what's the example of a big task versus a small task?
sure. So like if I have to come up with creative directions for the brand identity that's going to be created for X client, that's a lot of innovation work where there's a lot of mess. There's a
Yep.
lot of things that I don't know that are going to work that might work. So a lot of
A lot of waste.
exploratory
Yeah.
elements. Yeah, lots of waste. Uh, so that is something that I would say is like a larger project that requires a lot of give and take from me,
Yep.
where it's not going to be very cut and dry. There's going to be a lot of nuance to it that I have to navigate and then figure out which is the best solution. And
Mhm.
it might be really quick. And it might be longer than I'm anticipating.
Okay. And then a small task is like,
A small task is like, hey, I need these table signs for an event on Friday. Can you please put this together, put a QR code on it, and make sure it has printer's marks and just make it look branded? It's like, cool. I'll have this done in half an hour. Here you go.
great. All right, cool. Now I want to jump back to the comment you made about sitting on the couch watching TV and like kind of like oh, this is sort of I can do this at the same time. It's kind of fun. What is the? It's like torrentially down. I'm sure the sound is terrible right now. It's like raining so bad.
And hopefully
Apologies, listener.
it's definitely, I hope it's not as bad as the leaf blower that's going outside my window right
I
now.
can't hear
So,
that. Hopefully, you can't hear the rain. Anyway, what I have to ask all these stupid questions. It feels like a dumb question, right? But like work-life balance, don't you feel? I'm trying to surface all the fears of the listener. Don't you feel like there's this never-ending tide, or this never-ending request funnel that's just bearing down on you, and you have to like do things while you're watching TV, and does it feel incessant, or does it like how does it feel? Because it's got to be different. It's got to be different than we didn't talk about your former earlier life or your
mm,
your direct design business, how you price that work and how you bill for it. But I suppose everybody has the experience of billing hourly at some point. So how does it feel? Does it feel better and more predictable, or does it feel like exhausting and Sisyphean, if that's how you say that?
um, I think that so I'll answer the first part. I don't like using the term work life balance.
Mm.
I like using harmony instead, work life harmony. So at
Oh.
some points, you're going to have parts of your day where work is a lot more louder, and you hear that as more of it's the primary instrument that's being played, versus
Yeah.
versus life.
Yeah, yeah.
Where it's like, hey, you know what? Bass line's taking a backseat on this one, but drums are going to go ham right now, and and that's okay because I I like knowing that things are going to fluctuate, and putting yourself in that situation where you're like, I just want to have this predictable like time where I'm only going to work here and that's it. It's like you're gotta have some romance with your work life, man. Like,
What an interesting perspective. I've never heard anyone say it like that, but that is exactly how it feels to me. It's
yeah, well, I
like,
mean, I know because I know you like in one of your recent emails, you're like, I've written emails with a baby posted on my arm
yeah.
and one handed in the dark. And it's, do you love what you do or do you not? Because
Mm.
if you do, then you can find joy in doing that. And remembering to put yourself in the position that you could be otherwise, where you're working for somebody else or you hate your job and you want to leave. So if I have to choose between having the occasional day where I'm watching Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire and
Yes.
keying in keying keying in like mindless data work while I'm doing that because my wife's not even home yet because she's still at school teaching, then screw it. Like I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna give it my all to not let my health become in jeopardy
Right.
because of work. I would say that, I mean, you could literally call that life because it's your health. But
Right.
you get my point. I think most people think like leisure time versus work time.
Yeah. I mean, you just opened up a can of worms. I'll try not to go down that rabbit hole. But it's like when people would ask me, like, how do you find the time to write your email every day? And I'm like, well, how do you find the time to hug your kids? You like doing it. So you're just going to do it. But
Yep.
yeah, but let's bookmark that one because it's
Well,
with a whole
I,
rant.
I do have a small aside on that. If you
Okay.
don't,
Yeah, go for it.
are you a Alex Ramosi fan? Do you know who he
I'm
is?
familiar with that. I read the first $100 million offers book, and I mean, I can tell you what I think.
Well, I read the book too, but this is from a podcast that he was on, where he had somebody who critiqued him, asking early on as he was getting into fitness, like, aren't you worried about like burning out when you're trying to get in this finesse your physical form and really get buff and big like he is now?
Mm.
And it was from a guy who wasn't fit like, I don't know if he was severely overweight or,
Mm,
you know, uh, looked like a beanpole.
right.
But Alex said his reply was, "Man, you can worry about critiquing that when you're at my level." And that's how I feel in this position where I might I don't know what I have to finesse and refine about it, but I know that it's a good position to be in. So those details are things that I can work out later as far as or like I don't anticipate that I'm gonna burn myself out because that's not a problem that I've had to encounter lately.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, that
but
actually that is the crux of the question is like everybody I talk to who fears a subscription model, they are attracted to it for the predictability and the safety of it, of having a lot, more clients than they're used to, and in a way where they're allowed to charge their credit card every month. So it feels very predictable. It feels like you still have separated your time from money. It feels like you're still your own boss. Um, they want that, but then the fears, and if I feel like probably most of the questions I've asked are trying to allay those fears, or at least surface the fears or the reality of it to see if it's really a good choice for them. And burnout is basically those, like that is the encapsulation of the whole fear. All the fear boils down to burnout because they're imagining that this kind of predictability, that the dark side of this predictability and call it high utilization, the dark side of that is burnout, and that
yeah,
they'll just be like overwhelmed, under delivering, feeling bad that they're under delivering, resenting their clients, and all of these things. And so I guess probably the all of my questioning so far, most of it, is around talking about that fear, whether it's justified or not. And if it's not justified, then what were the tactics that you used to kind of prevent yourself from what you also feared was getting buried in work at the very beginning?
yeah. I think I mean, gosh, there's so many things that you can do to avoid burnout. I would definitely say that it's not like you have to jump all in. I mean, I didn't do that. I didn't do that with like with my first design business. I didn't do that with this. It
Mm,
was, I'm going to test this hypothesis and put the rubber to the road in a way that I know I can manage. Because I know for a fact, based on past experience at design school and having taken on clients myself, I knew for a fact that 5 people was 100% going to be manageable. It didn't matter what they threw on that board. I knew that 5 was going to be something that we could handle.
hmm
So
Cool. So you found a
find
point where your the leap of faith was minuscule, if non-existent,
the
and
leap of
you're
faith
like,
was more like a step,
yeah, a step of faith. And it's super important. You said it, but I want to amplify it. An experiment, dipping your toe. You've said it a couple times. It's like, let's just dip our toe in this, and maybe it will be, I don't want to say mistake. I don't want to say failure. It's just something we learn. And the bet, the ante that you're putting on the table, pretty low, pretty low,
Yes,
and potential
exactly.
upside extremely high.
Yeah, exactly. Because
Yeah.
yeah. So I think the other thing to mention around that would be, I mean, if you want to talk burnout, like have some other stuff that your value is more contingent upon that's outside of work than this. Like, I don't have hobbies. I mean, karate or play music, right?
Right. Yeah.
And spend time with people who aren't either your coworkers or clients.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's good advice in general. The capacity thing is the thing that just always comes up. So okay, so I know I'm looking at the time. I know we got to roll, but this has been great. So I really appreciate you sharing your experience. Is there any final words that you could perhaps help someone who wants to take the step of faith? You know, any parting words of advice for that person? There are lots of them. I started writing about subscription stuff, and like all of these people were like, "Tell me more, tell me more, tell me more." So I've been looking for folks just like you who have actual experience doing it and can help other people take the step of faith, which is probably going to be the title of this episode. But no, so any parting words of advice for that group of people who are on the fence?
What do you have to lose? I think that's what it comes down to, right? Like, and if you do have something to lose, what are the things you can do to mitigate that risk?
Yeah,
Like, can you chop it down a little bit? Can you limit yourself on clients? Can you raise the price so high that you're only going to get people or like that this is going to cover you? Because you have to think about where you're at now versus where you want to be. And if where you want to be, if this seems like it's a step to get there, then why not take it? Because you can always pivot and change. Like you're thinking, I think the problem is that they think that everyone's looking at them and watching them. And they think that if this screws up, then everybody's going to see I'm a failure. And the truth is, there's maybe going to be 5 people that see this as a failure. It's you, and then the 4 people that you tell this about that were directly involved watching you.
Mhm.
And that's okay because it will lead to something else. And there's nothing that stops you from changing your method again because you made a change to become a solopreneur anyway and took a
That's a
big amount of
huge
risk.
leap. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a huge leap. You left a steady full-time job with benefits and to
Yeah.
try and sell your stuff to people who've never met you before.
It's
And
crazy.
now there's a different method for you to do that that could be something that you like. It could also not be, but there's not going to be any kind of sword that you can pull out there that doesn't have 2 edges,
Hmm.
that isn't going to cut both ways. Because I know for a fact that we are leaving money on the table by not doing value-based pricing in the
Right.
traditional sense.
Hmm.
But this is the newest method that we thought we could utilize and leverage, and it's worked out so far. And it seems to be the trend that everyone else is going toward. So we figured there's no reason that we can't try it and see if it's worth it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Someone asked me the other day what the opposite of failure was, and I said regret, not success. And
Yes.
it's actually not, like, literally speaking, it's probably not literally true, but if you're not failing, then you're not trying anything. And if you're not trying anything, you're probably going to end up regretting that. So,
No, it's like the zone of proximal development for anything, right? Like uh you and I, apart from wearing black t-shirts all the time, we have another thing in common, which is that we both practice martial arts.
ah,
So I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and
nice.
I took a 10-year hiatus from when I graduated high school, and I did wrestling then as well. But
Mm.
you show up after 10 years, and even though I had some skill, like you get the crap beat out of you. But that's the only way you learn
Right.
is through having those trials and then knowing how to counter them and playing more strategically in your head. So the next time it comes around, you'd have some methods for defense and then pushing forward on the offensive. So I wish that mentality could be widespread throughout your audience and across anybody who takes their life and their responsibility for their finances into their own hands, because it's a huge risk.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, you can't learn to ride a bike by reading a book. At a certain point, you got to skin
Oh,
your knee.
if you did, I'd be very impressed. If you could learn to read a book while riding a bike, though, that would be something.
All right. And let's leave it there. That's a mic drop right there. So, Zach, thank you so much for joining us on Ditching Hourly.
Jonathan, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Where can people go to find out more about Conversion Factory or whatever else you're doing, and perhaps even ask you follow-up questions?
The best places to, if you want to see what Conversion Factory is doing, you can go to conversionfactory.co. That would be the easiest way to see like the pricing structures and what we're offering and get more detail on that. If you want to follow me, I am most active on Twitter. You can find me at ZSTVNS. It's my first initial and then my last name, sans vowels.
Old school.
And me and Paul Jarvis, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or you can find me on LinkedIn searching Zach Stevens. Just look for the semi-attractive bald guy, and that'll be me.
Nice. All right, folks, that's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark, and I hope you join us again next time for Ditching Hourly. Bye.